My husband told me he was buying us our dream home. But when the deed arrived, my hands went cold as I read the names printed in black ink, his name and his mistress' name as joint owners. My name wasn't anywhere on it. He smiled when I confronted him, calling it a surprise, as if betrayal could ever be gift-wrapped in mortgage documents. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I called my lawyer, and while he thought he was building a new life with her, I was quietly building his downfall. If you are watching this video, don't forget to like, share, and comment where you're watching from. This is the story of how my husband bought a house without me, with my savings, my forged signature, and another woman's name on the deed, and how I made sure he lost everything. My name is Elena Vargas, and before everything fell apart, I believed love started with honesty. I thought if you met someone through people you trusted, that meant they were safe. I was wrong. I met Damon 10 years ago through mutual friends at a small dinner party in Silver Lake, one of those cozy Los Angeles nights where music hums low, wine glasses never stay empty, and strangers start to feel familiar too quickly. He wasn't the loudest person in the room, but somehow he was the one everyone kept looking at. He had that quiet kind of confidence that fills the space without asking permission. When he laughed, people leaned closer. When he spoke, he made you feel like his attention was a spotlight, and for those few seconds, it belonged only to you. I remember he offered to pour me another glass of wine, and when our fingers brushed, he smiled like he already knew the effect he had. "Elena, right?" he said, like he'd been waiting all night to say my name out loud. We left the dinner together that night, standing under the streetlights, talking about everything and nothing. Damon had a way of making the ordinary sound important. Even his silences felt intentional. When he kissed me goodnight, it felt easy, certain, like the beginning of something that made sense. Looking back now, I realized that was Damon's gift, making people believe they were safe with him. He knew how to make love feel like a promise before turning it into a transaction. We dated for a year. Damon was attentive, generous with flowers, meticulous about plans. When he proposed on a rainy Tuesday, a quiet dinner, a ring that caught the candlelight and turned it into stars, I said yes before fear could translate itself into language. In the beginning, my husband and I were disciplined about money. We made a spreadsheet we called the house. We'd open it with reverence, like it was a prayer we were building together. Damon would add deposits and color code them. I'd shuffle freelance gigs so we could contribute more. On Sundays, we toured open houses we had no intention of buying, wandering through empty rooms and inventing a future inside them. "Imagine you waking up here," my husband would say, standing in a kitchen with sun streaming across the countertops like poured honey. You, barefoot, coffee, a little music. I'd pretend to scold him for romanticizing a mortgage. Then I'd step into that rectangle of light and pretend it was already mine. Our first fight about money wasn't really a fight, just a ripple. Damon took a guys' weekend with his coworkers to some cabin upstate and came home with a new watch. The kind with a face that flashed like a promise. When I asked how much, he said it was a gift from a client. When I asked who, he said something vague about a portfolio. It was a small lie, not worth a scene. We were saving for the house. I told myself my husband deserved something nice for working so hard. The taste of that lie lingered, though. Metallic, faint. Then came the second phone. Damon called it his business line, kept it in his gym bag like a pet he didn't want me to meet. At night, while we brushed our teeth side by side, I'd feel the itch of questions rising like a rash along my throat. I'd swallow them down with mouthwash and tell myself I was being paranoid. Suspicion doesn't arrive as a siren. It creeps. A late meeting that didn't match my husband's calendar, a receipt for a restaurant with a name he couldn't pronounce. Once, while Damon slept beside me, he murmured a name, Tal, and then turned away from me like instinct was guiding him somewhere I wasn't allowed to follow. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. Thin, official-looking, Crescent Realty Holdings printed in the corner. My husband had left it in the car, half buried under crumpled napkins, and a gym towel that smelled like salt and eucalyptus. I saw it when I went to grab my sunglasses. My hand hovered over it for a full minute. Wives don't open their husband's mail, but my fingers were already sliding under the envelope slip, and the guilt came second. After curiosity, after the cold weight of knowing something was wrong. The page fell open. A deed transfer receipt, an address I didn't recognize, a purchase price we had discussed in whispers, like it was a number that could conjure a life if we said it quietly enough. And there, written in clean, indifferent type, Damon Vargas and Talia Monroe. Not my name, not ours, Talia Monroe. A woman I'd never heard of. A woman whose name was now legally tied to my husband's on a house we'd saved for together. It's strange what your body does when a truth too big to hold lands on you. Mine cooled, as if someone had opened a window inside my chest. The air in the car turned sharp. My first thought was practical. The spreadsheet, the withdrawal dates, the phone calls Damon labeled client. Then the quieter, meaner thought crept in, the one that sits in your stomach like a stone. So this is what I've been paying for. I sat there in the driveway holding that piece of paper, watching the ink blur as my vision wavered. The house we saved for, the dream we color-coded, the future we toured on Sundays in rectangles of borrowed sunlight. My husband bought it, just not with me. Not with his wife. With her. I confronted my husband the way you set a table for company. With ritual, with intention, with a knife hidden under the napkin. I waited until Thursday evening, when he came home from Crestview Capital's offices in Midtown, his tie loosened, his briefcase heavy with documents he'd never let me see. I had already rehearsed my opening lines 17 times. I'd placed the deed transfer receipt on the kitchen counter, our white quartz island where we chopped vegetables and toasted anniversaries, centering it like a place setting. Then I stood with my back to the sink and waited for him to notice. Damon saw it the moment he set his keys down. His eyes flicked to the paper, then to my face, then back to the paper. And then he smiled. Not the smile he gave me on Sunday mornings, or the one he used when I surprised him with his favorite bourbon. This was the performance smile. The one my husband wore for investors he needed to charm, for board members he needed to convince, for people he was about to lie to with absolute confidence. It spread slowly across his face like oil on water. "Babe," he said, voice smooth as poured honey. "You weren't supposed to see that yet. It's a surprise. A surprise is a cake," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected, each word a stone I placed between us. A surprise is flowers on a Tuesday. A surprise is not a house with another woman's name on it. I tapped the paper where Talia Monroe was typed. Who is she, Damon? My husband sighed like I was a child who'd misunderstood a complicated adult concept. He moved closer, hands open in that placating gesture men use when they want you to believe they're being reasonable. "Talia's a temporary co-signer," he said. "Just a financial strategy to lock in a better interest rate. You know how mortgage underwriting works. 2 incomes look better than 1, especially with my bonus structure being variable. I didn't want to stress you out with the paperwork. I was handling it so we could..." I heard none of it and all of it, the way you hear water when you're falling through it. The words reached my ears. Temporary, co-signer, strategy, handling it. But they slid past meaning and became just noise. My husband kept talking, his mouth moving, his hands gesturing, his eyes searching my face for the moment I'd believe him. I nodded once. Twice. I watched his shoulders relax as he mistook my silence for acceptance. Then I turned and walked to our bedroom, closed the door with a gentleness that surprised me, and sat down on the carpet beside our bed. I stayed there until the light outside turned from gold to gray to black, until the pile of the carpet pressed ridges into my thighs like bruises trying to form. At 9:47 p.m., I pulled out my phone and called Marisol Peña, my best friend since college, the woman who'd held my hair back during food poisoning and held my hand during my father's funeral. Marisol worked as an ER nurse at Mount Sinai, so she understood crisis in a way most people didn't. The way you had to breathe first, assess second, act third. She answered on the second ring. Elena, her voice was steady, the kind of calm that doesn't flinch. I tried to speak and found I couldn't. "Breathe," my best friend said, like she was coaching me through triage. "Breathe, and then write everything down. Dates, names, numbers, everything. Do it now while it's fresh." I wrote in the Notes app on my phone, thumbs shaking so badly I had to retype half the words. September 27th. Deed transfer receipt. Crescent Realty Holdings. Property address. 1447 Sycamore Lane, Maplewood, NJ 07040. Purchase price, $865,000. Closing date, August 14th. I wrote about the joint savings account that had hemorrhaged $96,000 in 3 months. I wrote about the second phone, the Samsung Galaxy with the black case. I wrote about the name my husband murmured in his sleep. Talia Monroe. Grief made my fingers shake. Fury steadied them. By the time I finished, I had 2 pages of evidence and a clarity that felt like cold water on a burn. The next morning, Friday, September 28th, I called Detective Renata Cole, a private investigator who'd been recommended by Marcus Webb, a client I'd designed event materials for last year. Marcus ran a boutique PR firm and had hired Detective Cole when he suspected one of his vendors was skimming cash from influencer event budgets. She's expensive, Marcus had told me over coffee once, but she's thorough. And she doesn't judge. I found her number in my old emails. She answered on the first ring. Renata Cole Investigations. Her voice was all business. No warmth, no pretense. I told her my name. I told her I needed someone who could find the truth about my husband. Can you come to my office? She asked. Today? 2 p.m. Detective Renata Cole operated out of a 5th-floor walk-up in Chelsea, a narrow office with frosted glass on the door and filing cabinets that looked older than me. She was 50-something, with steel gray hair cut short and eyes that assessed you the way a jeweler assesses a stone, looking for flaws, for value, for what's hidden in the cut. She wore black slacks and a charcoal blazer. No wedding ring, no softness. When I sat down across from her desk, the detective slid a legal pad and pen toward herself and said, "Start from the beginning." Her calm stripped emotion off facts without dishonoring them. She didn't gasp when I told her about the deed. She didn't curse when I mentioned the joint account. She just wrote in shorthand, underlining certain phrases, asking questions that were surgical and lean. Do you have access to bank statements? Has he mentioned this woman before? Do you know if he's been to the property? When I finished, Detective Cole, the investigator who would become my most valuable ally, set down her pen and looked at me with something that wasn't quite sympathy, but wasn't indifference either. It was respect. "Mrs. Vargas," she said, "if a deed has another woman's name on it, your husband isn't sloppy. He's confident. He's sure you won't look. Which means this isn't improvised. This is planned." She tapped her pen against the notepad. "I'll need 3 days for preliminary surveillance and records searches. I'll start with the property, the woman, and his financial activity. My retainer is $5,000. After that, we bill hourly. And Mrs. Vargas?" The detective leaned forward slightly. "Whatever I find, I'm going to tell you the truth, even if it's worse than you think." Are you prepared for that? I thought about my husband's smile when he saw the deed. The performance smile, the investor smile, the smile of a man who'd done this before and believed he'd gotten away with it. I thought about Talia Monroe, a woman I'd never met, whose name was legally entwined with Damon's on a house I'd helped pay for. I reached into my purse and pulled out my checkbook. "I'm prepared," I said, and signed my name, Elena Vargas, in my own handwriting, not forged, not borrowed, mine. I handed the check to Detective Cole. She took it, stood, and extended her hand. We shook. Her grip was firm. The hunt had begun. 4 days passed in careful silence. I went to work, designing a rebrand for a nonprofit in Brooklyn. I responded to client emails. I made dinner, roasted chicken, couscous, the meals my husband liked. Damon asked if I was okay. I said I was fine, just tired from a deadline. He kissed my forehead and told me to get some rest. I smiled and nodded and watched him pour scotch into a crystal tumbler while his second phone buzzed face down on the coffee table. While I performed normalcy, Detective Renata Cole, my private investigator, worked in the shadows, tracking my husband's movements, pulling property records, building a file that would crack my life open like an egg. On Tuesday, October 2nd at 11:37 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Detective Cole. No words, just 3 photos. I was sitting in a Starbucks on Court Street, nursing a cold brew I hadn't touched, when I opened them. The first photo showed a house with eggshell siding, a wraparound porch painted clean white, black shutters framing windows that gleamed like they'd been washed that morning. The lawn was trimmed. A Japanese maple stood near the driveway, leaves turning the color of fire, and there, on the porch, stood my husband, Damon Vargas, portfolio manager, my spouse of 3 years, holding a set of keys in his right hand like he just won a prize. He was smiling, not performing, actually smiling. Beside him stood a woman I'd never seen before, Talia Monroe. She looked younger than me, maybe 28, 29, with a careful blowout, the kind that requires a salon chair, and 45 minutes under a dryer. Her hair fell in soft waves, past her shoulders, honey brown with expensive highlights. She wore a cream cashmere sweater and jeans that fit like they'd been tailored. But it was her smile that made my stomach drop. It was the kind of smile you wear when you believe someone else is going to cushion your fall forever. The kind of smile I used to wear when Damon and I toured open houses and invented futures in rectangles of sunlight. The second photo was worse. Damon and Talia were laughing at something off camera, their heads tilted toward each other, his hand resting on her lower back in that possessive way that says mine. The third photo made my throat close. My husband was cupping her face with both hands, thumbs on her cheekbones, the way he used to hold me on mornings when the world felt kind, and I believed in the permanence of small intimacies. I stared at that image until the pixels blurred. Then I set my phone face down on the table and counted to 20, breathing through my nose like Marisol had taught me in the ER when panic tried to take the wheel. An hour later, Detective Cole emailed her full preliminary report. The attachment was 42 pages. I opened it in the Starbucks bathroom, locked in a stall, sitting on a closed toilet lid because my legs wouldn't hold me. The report included property records, tax filings, and a section labeled email correspondence. Damon Vargas and Elias Granger. Elias Granger was the real estate agent who'd brokered the sale of 1,447 Sycamore Lane. Detective Cole had pulled his emails from a public records request tied to the transaction. The tone was brisk, transactional, the kind of back and forth you'd expect between a buyer and an agent navigating inspections and closing dates. But one email made me read it 3 times. I needed a lawyer who didn't find the word fraud theatrical. Someone who wouldn't soften it into misunderstanding or suggest I was overreacting. Marisol Pena gave me 3 names. I called Caleb North first because his voicemail was blunt: divorce, asset recovery, fraud litigation, leave details. When we met Tuesday morning at his office on Lexington Avenue, he looked like someone who ran toward fire with a legal pad in his hand. Mid-40s, graying at the temples, wearing a suit that had seen courtrooms but wasn't trying to intimidate. He shook my hand and said, "Tell me everything. No small talk, no coffee offer, just work." In the conference room, I slid the documents across the mahogany table like I was placing evidence at a crime scene. The deed with Talia Monroe's name. Bank statements showing $96,000 in withdrawals. Detective Renata Cole's surveillance photos. The email from Elias Granger where my husband promised to handle my signature. Caleb North, my new attorney, the man who would become my legal weapon, skimmed the first page, then slowed. His pen moved across the paper, underlining phrases with surgical precision. He paused at the forged signature email. Read it twice. Set down his pen and looked at me with the kind of focus that made the room feel smaller. "Elena," Caleb said, and his voice carried weight without raising volume. "This isn't just about a marriage falling apart. This is about criminal exposure, identity fraud, forgery, possibly embezzlement depending on where those funds originated." He tapped the bank statements. "We will file for divorce. We will bring a civil fraud claim against your husband and his mistress, and we will seek an immediate injunction to freeze any assets he moved without your consent. This is going to get loud. Are you ready for that?" I thought about Damon's performance smile, the way he told me to trust him while my name was being forged in a title office somewhere. "I'm ready," I said. Caleb drafted filings that afternoon while I sat in his office gathering ammunition. I pulled up our joint bank account on my laptop and downloaded every statement from the past 18 months. Each withdrawal felt like a punch. $12,000 on June 3rd labeled investment opportunity. $18,500 on July 22nd marked client expense reimbursement. $23,000 on August 1st with no description at all. I printed them and placed each page in a clear plastic sleeve, sliding them into a 3-ring binder. The transparency felt symbolic, like making the theft visible to the world would somehow make it hurt less. It didn't, but it made it real, documented, undeniable. Detective Renata Cole called that evening with an update that made my stomach drop. She'd traced the wire transfers from our joint account, the ones Damon had labeled vaguely as business expenses, and followed them to a shell company called Horizon Growth Partners, LLC, registered in Delaware. Impressive name. No employees. No office. No legitimate business activity. Just a bank account that received deposits from Damon and sent payments to mortgage companies, furniture stores, and a contractor who'd renovated the kitchen at 1447 Sycamore Lane. "It's a pass-through," Detective Cole said, her voice flat and clinical. "He's laundering marital assets to hide the paper trail." The shell entity had a sole beneficiary listed on the LLC registration documents Detective Cole pulled from state records, Talia Monroe. My husband had built his Mistress a financial fortress using my savings. Every dollar I'd added to our house fund spreadsheet, every freelance gig I'd taken to boost our down payment, every Sunday morning we'd spent color coding deposits. All of it had been rerouted through a fake company to fund a life I wasn't part of. The precision of it made me nauseous. This wasn't spontaneous infidelity. This was architecture. He'd built an escape route and furnished it with my money. Caleb filed the injunction on Thursday, October 11th. By Friday morning, Vanessa Holt, the asset manager at First Republic Bank who'd processed Damon's mortgage application, called Caleb's office. Her voice on speakerphone was careful, the tone of someone walking a tightrope between professional duty and self-preservation. "Mr. North," she said, "I've reviewed the documentation your client provided. There are irregularities in the mortgage file. Specifically, concerns about signature authentication on the co-borrower income verification forms. I'm required to report this internally." Caleb leaned forward. "What kind of irregularities, Ms. Holt?" She paused. "The kind that suggests digital manipulation." Vanessa's formal testimony came via recorded deposition 3 days later. Caleb had her statement transcribed and highlighted the critical line. "Upon forensic review, the digitization of Mrs. Vargas's signature on documents dated August 9th and August 12th, 2024, does not match prior signature samples from her account history. The stroke patterns, pressure points, and pen lift sequences are inconsistent with authentic handwriting." I read that sentence sitting in Caleb's office and felt something crack open inside me. Not grief this time, but validation. Cold, legal, documented validation. My husband had forged my name, and now a bank official was saying it out loud. Caleb printed the signature analysis and laid it beside a copy of my real signature from our joint account opening forms. The forged one was too perfect. The looping E in Elena was practiced, rehearsed, like someone had traced my handwriting until they could replicate it in their sleep. My real signature had a small hitch in the 5 of Vargas where my pen always caught. The forgery didn't. I stared at that fake version of my name, the one Damon or someone he'd hired had created, and understood that he hadn't just stolen my money. He'd stolen my identity, my credibility, my legal autonomy. He'd made me a ghost signature on someone else's dream. Caleb North filed the signature analysis with the court on October 18th, attached to a motion titled Emergency Request for Temporary Restraining Order and Asset Preservation. The language was dense, legal, cold. Petitioner presents clear and convincing evidence of forgery, identity theft, and ongoing dissipation of marital assets. Respondent has demonstrated intent to defraud and capacity to conceal. Without immediate intervention, petitioner faces irreparable financial harm. Within 6 hours, Judge Nolan Price signed the order. First Republic Bank put a temporary hold on the mortgage at 1447 Sycamore Lane. Damon's access to our joint accounts was frozen pending forensic audit. The fortress he'd built started cracking at the foundation. Detective Renata Cole found the second twist buried 3 layers deep in the wire transfer history. She called me on a Wednesday evening while I was heating up leftovers I wouldn't eat. "Elena," she said, and I could hear papers rustling on her end. "I traced the deposits into Horizon Growth Partners. They didn't come from your joint account. They came from an account labeled Crestview Capital, Client Distribution Fund." The words didn't land at first. Then they did. "Client funds," I repeated slowly. "He used client money?" Detective Cole's voice was steady, unemotional. "The transfers are labeled temporary float. 12 separate wires over 4 months. Total, $240,000. All moved into the shell company, then out to the mortgage and renovation costs." I stared at the phrase temporary float on the document Detective Cole emailed me until it stopped looking like words and started looking like evidence of something much darker than infidelity. Damon hadn't just stolen from me. He'd stolen from his clients. People who trusted him with their retirement accounts, their investment portfolios, their children's college funds. He treated their money like a personal loan he'd pay back later, gambling that no one would notice the gap before he could cover it. Except now there was a house, a mistress, and a paper trail. The ugliness of it sat on my tongue like metal, sharp and poisonous. If this went public, it wouldn't just upend our marriage. It would end Damon's career, trigger regulatory investigations, possibly criminal charges. Part of me, the part that had loved him, that had built spreadsheets with him on Sunday mornings, wanted to protect him from that. But the louder part, the part that had discovered her forged signature and her drained bank account, knew that protecting him now would make me complicit in his crimes. If he'd done this to his clients, if he'd stolen from strangers who believed in his responsible growth pitch, then he'd do it again. And the next victim might not catch him. I confronted my husband in the kitchen on Thursday night. The same kitchen where we'd burned toast and celebrated birthdays and made peace after small arguments. He came home late, tie already off, smelling like scotch and exhaustion. I had printed the wire transfer records and spread them across the island like a hand of cards I was about to play. Damon saw them and stopped in the doorway. His face did something complicated. Surprise, calculation, then a forced calm that looked like a mask sliding into place. "We need to talk," I said, and my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, someone harder, someone done pretending. "Elena, listen," he started, but I cut him off by sliding the top document toward him, the one showing $42,000 moved from Crestview Capital, Client Distribution Fund, into Horizon Growth Partners, LLC on July 18th. "Temporary float," I said. "That's what you called it. Like you were borrowing sugar from a neighbor." Damon's face tightened, color draining from his cheeks. "I was going to pay it back," he said, and his voice cracked on the word back like it was a promise he'd already broken. "It's a short-term liquidity thing. You don't understand how portfolio management works. I'll fix it. You're overreacting." "Overreacting?" I repeated, tasting the word like it was something rotten. "You forged my signature. You stole from your clients. You built a life with another woman using money that wasn't yours. And I'm overreacting?" My voice stayed level, almost gentle, which seemed to scare him more than shouting would have. "Elena, you don't want this to get ugly," Damon said, stepping closer, hands raised like he was trying to calm a spooked animal. "Think about what this means, for both of us, for my job. If this comes out—" He stopped, realizing he'd just confirmed what I already knew. His job depended on the staying quiet. "It's already ugly," I said, and the words felt like a door closing. "And I'm done protecting you from the consequences of your choices. I spent 3 years believing you were building something with me. Turns out you were just using me as a credit score and a signature you could forge when it was convenient." Damon stepped even closer, his face hardening into something I didn't recognize. "Think about my job, Elena," he said, voice low and threatening. "Think about what happens if you burn this down." I met his eyes and didn't blink. "I am thinking about your job," I said. "That's exactly why I hired a lawyer who knows the law better than you know how to lie." The confrontation didn't end with shouting or tears or broken dishes like fights do in movies. It ended with silence. Cold, final silence. Damon stood there, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to find the right words to rebuild the con, but I'd already turned away. I walked out of the kitchen, the battlefield of our marriage, leaving him standing there with evidence spread across the counter like autopsy photos. The papers wouldn't disappear. The wire transfers wouldn't undo themselves. And I wouldn't be convinced to look away. Not anymore. Upstairs, sitting on the edge of our bed that no longer felt like ours, I understood something that settled into my bones like cold certainty. I wasn't just fighting to recover stolen savings or to win a divorce settlement. I was fighting to ensure Damon Vargas couldn't do this to anyone else. Not to another wife. Not to another client. Not to another person naive enough to trust a man who color-coded spreadsheets while forging signatures in the dark. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. And justice, I was learning, required witnesses, documentation, and the courage to let the whole rotten structure collapse. On Monday, October 22nd, Caleb North and I walked into the New York County Courthouse to file the divorce petition and the civil fraud complaint. I wore navy, the color of deep water, of storms gathering offshore, of things you can't see coming until they're already here. The dress was simple, professional, the kind of thing you wear when you want to be taken seriously. Caleb carried a leather briefcase containing 47 pages of evidence, bank statements, wire transfers, forged signatures, Detective Cole's surveillance photos, Vanessa Holt's deposition. We took the elevator to the 4th floor and filed everything with a clerk who barely looked up. The storm had begun, not with thunder, but with paperwork. And Damon Vargas, my husband, the man who believed he could maintain his double life without consequences, was about to learn what it felt like when the floor falls through. Judge Nolan Price was assigned to our case on October 30th. When I saw his name on the docket, I looked him up. 62 years old, 28 years on the bench, a reputation for precision and zero tolerance for theatrics. The first time I sat in his courtroom, I understood why lawyers either loved him or feared him. He had the stillness of an anvil, the kind of presence that didn't need to move to exert force. When he looked at people, he looked at them the way scales look at weight, measuring credibility in silence. He didn't smile, he didn't perform sympathy. He just listened, and somehow that felt like the most honest thing I'd encountered in months. Damon's attorney was a man named Richard Kellerman, expensive suit, Georgetown law pedigree, the kind of lawyer who treats courtrooms like networking events. During the preliminary hearing, he tried charm the way some people try cologne, applying it liberally and hoping it would mask the smell underneath. He softened forgery into document processing confusion. He called the $240,000 in client fund transfers an accounting mislabel that was always intended to be reconciled. He smiled at Judge Price like they were old friends about to share a bourbon. It slid to the floor like oil. The judge's face didn't change. He just wrote something in his notes and said, "Continue, Mr. North." Caleb North, my attorney, my legal architect, built the case the way you build a fortress, methodically, with foundations that couldn't be shaken. He started with the ground floor, our joint savings account, the timeline of withdrawals, the spreadsheet we'd created together, labeled House Fund. He showed how $96,000 had disappeared in 3 months, each transfer corresponding to dates when Damon claimed to be working late or meeting clients. Then he added floors. Detective Renata Cole's surveillance photos showing Damon and Talia Monroe on the porch of 1447 Sycamore Lane. Vanessa Holt's deposition, confirming signature irregularities. The forged email from Elias Granger, where Damon promised to handle my signature. Each piece of evidence stacked on top of the last, creating a structure too solid to topple. The steel beam came when Caleb presented the wire transfer records, showing funds moved from Crestview Capital, Client Distribution Fund, into Horizon Growth Partners, LLC, then directly to mortgage payments and home renovations. Richard Kellerman objected, calling it irrelevant to the dissolution proceedings. Judge Price overruled him. Kellerman tried a different approach during cross-examination, suggesting the transfers were simply temporary reallocations common in portfolio management. An accounting mislabel, he said, as if language could soften theft. Caleb didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He just pulled out 12 separate wire confirmations, each one labeled temporary float, and placed them in front of the judge. Receipts don't argue. They just exist. On November 14th, Carmen Delaney took the stand. She was a neighbor who lived 4 houses down from 1447 Sycamore Lane. A retired school teacher in her late 60s with sensible shoes and the kind of observational skills that come from decades of watching children lie about homework. Caleb asked her what she'd noticed about the house over the past 3 months. Carmen adjusted her glasses and spoke in a voice that was matter-of-fact, almost gentle. "I saw them nearly every day," she said. "The man and the woman, they'd come and go like they lived there. Groceries, furniture deliveries. Once I saw them planting tulip bulbs in the front garden." Caleb asked if Carmen had spoken to them. She nodded. Once, in early September, the woman, "Miss Monroe, I believe," introduced herself and the man to our liaison. She called him her partner. Said they were excited to be part of the neighborhood. Carmen paused, glancing briefly at me in the gallery. She mentioned they were both working professionals. "I saw him leaving early in the mornings, coming back in the evenings. I just assumed—" She trailed off. Caleb leaned forward slightly. "You assumed what, Ms. Delaney?" Carmen's voice was soft but devastatingly clear. "I just thought his wife must work late. Or maybe traveled for work. It never occurred to me she didn't know about the house. The courtroom made a sound, not quite a gasp, more like a collective, held breath released all at once. It was the sound of pity, but not for Damon. I felt it wash over me, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt seen. Judge Price wrote something in his notes. Richard Kellerman stood to object, then seemed to think better of it and sat back down. The damage was done. Carmen Delaney, a woman who'd never met me, had just dismantled my husband's entire defense with 8 words. I just thought his wife must work late. Talia Monroe sat in the gallery behind Damon throughout the proceedings. She wore a charcoal blazer and minimal jewelry, except for a thin gold necklace. She touched whenever Caleb introduced a new piece of evidence. It was a tell, the kind of nervous gesture people make when they're trying to convince themselves they're calm. Her lipstick stayed perfect. Her posture stayed straight. But her hand kept lifting to that necklace, fingers worrying the chain like rosary beads. When Caleb called her to the stand on November 16th, she walked to the witness box with the careful precision of someone crossing ice. Her voice, when she spoke, was a practice whisper, soft, almost fragile. Caleb asked her how she'd met Damon. She said through mutual friends at a charity gala in June. He asked when she learned he was married. Talia's eyes filled with what looked like genuine tears. I believed him when he said he was separated, she said, voice breaking slightly on separated. He told me the divorce was already in progress, that he was just waiting for paperwork to finalize. I never would have, if I'd known. She trailed off, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue her attorney handed her. Caleb let the silence spread through the courtroom like heat rising from asphalt. He didn't interrupt her crying. He didn't rush. He just stood there, hands folded, waiting until she composed herself. Then, in a voice that was almost conversational, he asked, "Miss Monroe, you believed Mr. Vargas so completely. When he said he was separated, that you accepted $240,000 in wire, transfers into a shell company registered under your name." Talia's lips trembled. Her attorney, Monica Reeves, shot to her feet. "Objection, Your Honor." Argumentative and assumes facts not in evidence. Judge Price looked at Caleb. "Sustained. Rephrase, Mr. North." But Caleb didn't need to rephrase. The question hung in the air, unspoken but obvious. If Talia truly believed Damon was separated and getting divorced, why had she allowed hundreds of thousands of dollars to flow through a company bearing her name? Why hadn't she asked questions? The answer was clear even without her saying it. Because she knew. Or she didn't want to know, which amounted to the same thing. Talia sat in the witness box, mascara threatening to run, and said nothing. Sometimes silence convicts louder than words. By mid-November, the bank's temporary hold on the mortgage at 1447 Sycamore Lane had become a formal suspension pending fraud investigation. Damon's payments were in limbo. He couldn't refinance. He couldn't sell. He couldn't even access home equity because the title was tainted. The dominoes he'd set up so carefully were clicking, one by one, in a sequence he couldn't stop. Caleb told me over coffee one afternoon that Damon had tried to negotiate, offering to return my share of the marital assets in exchange for dropping the fraud claims. "What did you tell him?" I asked. Caleb smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him. I told him we'd see him in court. Judgment Day arrived on December 3rd, a Wednesday morning when the sky was the color of old pewter. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like a measured exhale, air returning to lungs that had forgotten how to breathe. I sat in the gallery beside Marisol Peña, who'd taken the morning off from her shift at Mount Sinai to be there. She held my hand, her fingers steady and warm. Caleb North sat at the plaintiff's table with 3 binders of evidence stacked in front of him. Across the aisle, Damon Vargas sat beside Richard Kellerman, his expensive attorney, looking smaller than I remembered. Talia Monroe wasn't there. Her lawyer had negotiated her absence, citing emotional distress. Judge Nolan Price entered at 9:30 a.m., and the bailiff called us to rise. When we sat back down, the judge opened a folder and began to read. He read slowly, each word placed with the care of someone handling something fragile and sharp. In the matter of Vargas v. Vargas, case number 2024D08847, he began, his voice carrying the weight of finality. The court has reviewed the evidence presented over the course of these proceedings. The documentation is extensive. The testimony is credible, and the pattern of behavior is unambiguous. He paused, looking over his reading glasses at Damon. The court finds clear and convincing evidence of fraudulent misrepresentation and forgery. My heart, which had been a clenched fist for weeks, tight and aching in my chest, loosened a notch. I felt Marisol squeeze my hand. Caleb sat perfectly still, the way lawyers do when they've already won but can't celebrate yet. Judge Price continued reading from his written decision, his voice never rising, never falling, just steady and relentless. Mr. Vargas knowingly and intentionally forged his wife's signature on mortgage documents to facilitate the purchase of a property with another individual. He diverted marital funds totaling $96,000 without consent or disclosure. He created a shell entity to obscure the transfer of assets. These actions constitute fraud, identity theft, and willful dissipation of marital property. The judge's orders came in a list, each one a hammer strike. Full restitution of Elena's 50% share of all marital assets, including the joint savings account, calculated at $127,000 as of June 2024. Reimbursement for all fraudulent transfers, plus punitive damages in the amount of $50,000 for the emotional distress and legal costs incurred as a direct result of the defendant's fraudulent conduct. Full payment of plaintiff's legal fees, totaling $38,000 to date. Damon's face went white. Richard Kelleran wrote furiously on a legal pad, but his hand movements looked mechanical, like he was documenting a car accident after it had already happened. Judge Price turned the page. The court hereby voids the deed to the property, located at 1447 Sycamore Lane, Maplewood, New Jersey, finding that the mortgage application was tainted by fraud and forgery. The court instructs First Republic Bank to unwind the mortgage and pursue whatever remedies are available under federal banking regulations. Any equity in the property shall be divided, according to the contribution analysis provided by the forensic accountant, which clearly demonstrates that 87% of the down payment and closing costs originated from marital funds to which the plaintiff contributed equally. He looked up from the page. This is not a gray area. This is theft dressed in paperwork. Then came the line that made my spine straighten. Judge Price set down the paper and looked directly at Damon with the kind of gaze that allows no deflection. The court also notes irregularities in the source of funds used for this property purchase. Wire transfers from accounts labeled Crestview Capital, Client Distribution Fund suggest potential embezzlement or misappropriation of client assets. While this court does not have jurisdiction over criminal matters, I am referring these irregularities to the New York State Department of Financial Services and the Securities and Exchange Commission for investigation. Damon flinched like he'd been slapped. My husband's professional life, the career he'd built, the reputation he'd cultivated, was now under federal scrutiny. The final order felt like a clean-cut, surgical, and precise. Respondents Damon Vargas and Talia Monroe are hereby ordered to vacate the property at 1447 Sycamore Lane within 30 days of this judgment, Judge Price said. Any occupancy thereafter will constitute unlawful detainer and will be subject to immediate eviction proceedings and additional penalties. This court will not allow fraudulently obtained property to be used as leverage or shelter. He closed the folder. Judgment entered. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down once, a sound like a door closing on a room I'd never have to enter again. We walked into the hallway, and the air felt different. Colder, cleaner, like stepping outside after being trapped in a room with no windows. Damon tried to catch my eye as we passed each other near the elevator bank. He looked diminished, his expensive suit somehow hanging wrong on his frame. I looked past him to the exit sign at the end of the corridor, glowing calm and green, and I kept walking. There was nothing left to say. No apology he could offer would undo the forgery. No explanation would return the stolen money. We were done in a way that was final and legal, and stamped with a judge's signature. Talia wasn't in the hallway, but her attorney Monica Reeves stood near the restrooms, scrolling through her phone with the kind of detachment that said she'd already moved on to her next case. I wondered if Talia was crying somewhere, if she understood yet that the house she'd been given was built on lies and would now be taken away. Or maybe she'd already packed, already moved on to the next man who'd promise her a life she didn't have to earn. Either way, she wasn't my problem anymore. Caleb North walked beside me toward the elevator, carrying his briefcase with the same calm efficiency he'd carried through the entire trial. When we reached the bank of elevators, he set the briefcase down and turned to me. For a moment, he looked less like an attorney and more like a human being who just watched someone reclaim their dignity in 12-point font. He squeezed my shoulder, a small human gesture amidst all the paper noise, all the legal language, all the procedural machinery of justice. "You did it," he said quietly. I shook my head. "We did it." He smiled. "You hired me." That was the hardest part. Outside, the December sky was the color of a bruise turning yellow, about to heal. The air smelled like cold pavement and the first hint of snow that hadn't fallen yet. Marisol linked her arm through mine, and we walked toward the subway station, not saying much, just existing in the aftermath. Justice felt closer than I'd expected. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was quieter, steadier, like a door that finally fits its frame after years of sticking. It was knowing that the man who'd forged my signature would now have to explain himself to regulators and judges and auditors. It was knowing I'd walked into court with evidence and walked out with restitution. It was knowing I'd done the brave thing, the hard thing, the thing that would protect the next person Damon Vargas might try to betray. The following fall, October 2025, nearly a year after I'd found that deed in Damon's car, I bought a small townhouse in Park Slope. 2 bedrooms, a galley kitchen with windows that faced east, and a postage stamp backyard with a fig tree that was older than me. The sunlight came through those kitchen windows without asking permission, flooding the counters every morning like it had been waiting for me to arrive. I paid $425,000 with clean funds, the restitution from the divorce settlement, my half of our joint savings returned, and a small nest egg I'd rebuilt from freelance work. The closing took 30 minutes. No drama, no forged signatures, just paperwork and keys. I signed my name on the deed slowly, savoring the rhythm of my own handwriting. The small hitch in the 5 of Vargas where my pen always caught, the looping E of Elena that slanted slightly right, my signature, authentic and mine, on a document that gave me sole ownership of something I'd chosen myself. The real estate agent handed me the keys with a smile. "Congratulations," she said. I believed I would love it here. Not because the house was perfect. The bathroom tiles were dated, the hardwood floors needed refinishing, but because it was mine in a way nothing had been mine in years. No ring blistered my finger anymore. I'd taken off my wedding band the day Judge Price signed the divorce decree, placed it in a small velvet box, and stored it in the back of my closet where I kept things I didn't want to look at but couldn't quite throw away. Instead, I wore a plain silver band on my right hand. Thin, unadorned, bought from a small jeweler in Williamsburg who asked no questions. It was a reminder that commitments can be remade, even if the vows are only to yourself. A promise that I would ask the hard questions, that I would look at the receipts, that I would never again mistake silence for trust. Sometimes, driving back from the grocery store or returning from a client meeting in Jersey, I'd pass 1447 Sycamore Lane in Maplewood. Not on purpose, just because the route took me past the neighborhood where Damon had tried to build his double life. The first time I drove by in March, the for sale sign was still up, weathered and crooked. By June, the sign had been replaced by new owners, a young couple with a toddler I saw once, playing in the front yard. The house had been sold at a loss, foreclosed and auctioned, its history scrubbed clean by paperwork and new paint. By September, the house looked different. The HOA had trimmed the bushes into compliance, sharp edges and uniform heights. The shutters had been repainted black. The lockbox that had hung on the front door during the foreclosure was gone, leaving a small rectangular shadow on the white paint where it had been. It hung there in my memory like a tongue of metal, a reminder of access denied. The house had been reclaimed, not by Damon or Talia, but by strangers who knew nothing of forged signatures or stolen savings. It belonged to someone else's dream now. One Saturday in late September, I parked across the street and just sat there for a moment. The wind moved through the Japanese maple in the front yard, turning the leaves into small red hands that waved and released. Wind chimes on the porch, new ones, installed by the new owners, sang in a register that sounded almost apologetic, as if the air itself were empty of anyone's claims. The house looked peaceful, ordinary, like it had forgotten what it cost. I wondered if Damon ever drove by, if he saw what I saw, a place that had moved on without him. Carmen Delaney, the neighbor who testified at the trial, was checking her mailbox when I got out of the car. She looked up, recognized me, and waved. I walked across the street. "Mrs. Vargas," she said warmly, then corrected herself. "Or is it MS now?" I smiled. "Elena is fine." She studied my face for a moment, the way people do when they're measuring change. "You look better," she said simply. I laughed, surprised by how much I meant it when I said, "I feel real." Carmen nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. "Good," she said. "That house has a nice family now. A teacher and a nurse. They deserve it." Marisol Pena came over the weekend I moved into the Park Slope townhouse, arriving with cardboard boxes, 2 bottles of wine, and an insistence on helping me paint the bedroom even though I'd already hired painters. "You need to claim this space," she said, handing me a roller. "Put your fingerprints on the walls." We painted one accent wall a color called sage mist, which looked more like the color of sea glass than anything herbal. Marisol talked about a patient she'd saved in the ER that week, a teenager who'd coded twice and lived. I told her about a logo design I'd just finished for a nonprofit that fed houseless families. Normal conversations. Life continuing. We laughed until our sides hurt, then cried without planning to. The kind of crying that comes from relief rather than grief, from muscles finally unclenching after holding tension for too long. Then we ordered Thai food and ate it sitting on the floor because my furniture hadn't arrived yet. Healing looked like that, I realized. Mundane, repetitive, welled with surprises you didn't have to distrust. It was painting walls and eating pad thai and telling your best friend things you'd been too scared to say out loud. It was learning that starting over didn't mean erasing everything. It meant choosing what to carry forward. Later that night, after Marisol left and the apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, I sat on the floor of my new living room and understood something about my story. It had a residual hum, a frequency that would keep vibrating long after the dramatic parts ended. The lesson wasn't just about Damon's betrayal. It was simpler and harder than that. When someone shows you a dream so beautiful you forget to ask whose name is on the deed, ask. Ask again. Ask for copies. Love does not ask you to be ignorant. Love asks you to be brave enough to know. The house at 1447 Sycamore Lane, the one that was supposed to be my prison, had become Damon's tomb instead. Not literally. He was alive somewhere, probably rebuilding a life with a tarnished resume and revoked licenses. But that house carried his failure now, his hubris, his downfall. Every time First Republic Bank filed paperwork on the foreclosure, every time the new owners refinanced or paid property taxes, every time someone pulled the title history and saw the voided deed, the fraud notation, the legal scar tissue, the house haunted him. And I hadn't lifted a finger to make it happen. I just told the truth, provided receipts, and let consequences do what consequences do. That was poetic justice. That was enough. Elias, we can expedite on our end. I'll handle my wife's signature. She's swamped with client work and asked me to take point on paperwork. Let me know if you need anything else to close on time. Damon? I read that line until the words rearranged into something sharper. I'll handle my wife's signature. Not I'll ask my wife to sign. Not we'll review together. Handle. Like I was a problem to be managed. Like my name was a tool he could pick up and use without asking. Forgery. The word landed in my chest like a stone. My husband hadn't just bought a house with another woman. He'd made me legally complicit without my knowledge, without my consent, using my identity like a credit card he'd stolen from my wallet. The new house wasn't just betrayal. It was a trap. Damon had used my name, Elena Vargas, to secure financing, to satisfy underwriting requirements, to make himself look like a stable, married man with joint assets and shared responsibility. He'd weaponized my credit score, my tax returns. The spreadsheet we built together on Sunday mornings when I still believed marriage was a ledger that balanced. And somewhere in a lawyer's office or a title company or a notary's desk, there was a document with my signature on it. Except I'd never signed it. He had. Or someone had. For him. I sat in that bathroom stall and understood something that made my skin go cold. Damon Vargas, my husband, the man I'd trusted with my future, didn't just betray my heart. He weaponized my identity. He turned my name into a tool, my trust into a liability, my love into a legal trap. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a midlife crisis or any of the soft words people use to cushion infidelity. This was premeditated. This was fraud. And if Detective Cole was right, if he was confident I wouldn't look, then he'd been confident because he'd done this carefully, thoroughly, with the same meticulous planning he used to color code our house fund spreadsheet. I scrolled back to the photos Detective Cole had sent. I stared at Talia Monroe, the other woman, the co-signer, the one whose name sat beside my husband's on a deed I should have signed. She was smiling on that porch like it was hers, like Damon had built this for her, like she had no idea she was standing in the ruins of someone else's dream, someone else's savings, someone else's 3 years of Sunday open houses and whispered plans. And maybe she didn't know. Maybe Damon had lied to her too, told her I was gone or indifferent or already out of the picture. Or maybe she knew exactly what she was doing. Either way, she was there, and I wasn't. I forwarded the email and photos to my personal cloud storage, then to Marisol Pena, my best friend and confidant. With a single text, he forged my signature. She replied in seconds, "Get a lawyer, now." I stared at Talia's face on my screen, at the careful blowout and cashmere sweater, and smiled that didn't yet know what it cost. And I thought about how betrayal has layers. The first layer is the lie. The second is the theft. The third is the audacity to make you complicit in your own destruction. The ledger between Damon and me is closed. The accounts are settled, the assets divided, the signatures authenticated and filed away in courthouse basements where documents go to gather dust and legal precedent. But there's one more page I'm writing, and this one isn't about him. It's not about betrayal or forgery or the house at 1447 Sycamore Lane that became a monument to lies. This page is about me, about Elena Vargas, freelance graphic designer, divorced woman, survivor of identity theft. About the person I'm becoming now that I've stopped being the person he needed me to be, quiet, trusting, convenient. This is about how you reclaim a life when someone tried to mortgage your future without your consent. It's not a straight line. It's not one dramatic moment where you stand up in court and everything clicks into place. It's smaller than that and harder. It's opening a bank account with only your name on it and feeling your hands shake as you sign the forms. It's changing passwords and realizing how many accounts you shared, how deeply intertwined your digital lives had become. It's learning to sleep alone without startling awake at 3 a.m., convinced you heard his key in the lock. It's the slow, unglamorous work of untangling yourself from someone who wove lies into the fabric of your daily life. But here's what I learned. Hands stop shaking when you remember they can hold a pen and a plan at the same time. When I hired Caleb North, when I signed that first check to Detective Renata Cole, when I wrote down dates and amounts and names in my phone while sitting on my bedroom floor, my hands shook. Grief did that. Fear did that. But every time I took action, every time I chose to document instead of deny, to investigate instead of ignore, my hands grew steadier. By the time I signed the deed to my Park Slope townhouse, my signature was firm, unwavering, mine. People say revenge doesn't heal. They say it's bitter, that it poisons you, that it makes you just as bad as the person who hurt you. Maybe they've only seen revenge done messily, though. Like fire left uncontained, consuming everything, including the person who lit the match. They haven't seen the other kind, the kind that's legal and precise. The kind that doesn't require gasoline or fury, just patience and receipts. That's the kind of revenge I chose, and it didn't poison me. It freed me. I didn't torch Damon's life. I didn't have to. He built it out of kindling, forged signatures, stolen client funds, shell companies with impressive names, and empty offices. All I did was hand a judge a match and show him where my husband had stacked the evidence. Damon lit his own fire. He signed his name next to Talia Monroe's on a deed that had my money in it. He wrote, "I'll handle my wife's signature," in an email to Elias Granger, and hit send. He transferred $240,000 from client accounts and labeled it temporary float like semantics would protect him from consequences. I didn't destroy him. I just let his own matches burn the paper he'd signed in my name. The moment that felt most like justice wasn't the courtroom, or the judgment, or even the foreclosure notice taped to the door he'd wanted so badly. It was quieter than that. It was Judge Nolan Price handing me a court order that voided the forged deed, that returned my share of our savings, that put my name back in my own hands. He gave me back my life with a signature that was legally, authentically, undeniably mine. Not performed, not forged, not borrowed, just mine. That's what justice looks like when it's done right. It's not dramatic. It's documentary. It's your name, written by your own hand, on paperwork that says you exist again. What comes next isn't another house. I learned that lesson. A house is just walls and a mortgage and a deed that can be forged if you're not paying attention. What I'm building now is different. It's a home inside my own skin, where silence means peace instead of secrets, where I can sit in my kitchen in Park Slope with morning light on the counters and not wonder who he's texting, not calculate how long he's been in the shower, not decode the tone of his voice when he says he's working late. The home I'm building now has different architecture. It's made of boundaries and questions and the willingness to walk away from anyone who asks me to ignore what I see clearly. It's mornings making coffee, dark roast, the kind Damon never liked, without wondering if he's lying to someone else in real time. It's sunlight on a counter I bought with restitution money and freelance income and my own credit score. It's grocery shopping alone and not having to justify the organic strawberries or the expensive cheese. It's small and mundane and deeply mine. The bed is mine, the Wi-Fi password is mine, the checking account with a slowly growing balance is mine. And when I sign my name on a birthday card or a client contract or a tax return, I do it slowly, savoring the hitch in the 5 and the loop in the E, because that signature has been through hell and back and it still belongs to me. I'm telling this story out loud, to you, to anyone who'll listen, so other women recognize the shape of a lie before it sets in concrete, before it becomes a mortgage they didn't sign and a mistress they never met, and a life they're paying for without knowing it. The signs were there, the second phone, the vague explanations, the watch that was a gift from a client, the way he'd smile when caught and perform reasonableness until I doubted my own eyes. I ignored those signs because I wanted to believe in the spreadsheet we'd built together, in the Sunday open houses, in the man who wiped graphite off my wrist in a lobby 7 years ago. But wanting to believe someone doesn't make them trustworthy. It just makes you vulnerable. Damon used to say, "We're so close, babe." He'd say it while updating our house fund spreadsheet, while calculating mortgage pre-approvals, while negotiating with real estate agents I never met. He meant the numbers, the down payment goal, the closing date, the approval letter that would let him buy the life he wanted. But he never understood closeness as honesty, the kind that makes you tell the truth even when it costs you something you thought you couldn't live without. We were close, in a way he didn't anticipate. Close to the moment his world collapsed. Close to the day I stopped confusing pain with devotion, silence with trust, his convenience with my worth. Close to the exact second when my name, Elena Vargas, written by my own hand, authenticated by forensic analysis, recognized by a judge who looked at forged documents the way scales look at weight, placed me back in the center of my life. That's all a backstory is, really. The ground under the house, the foundation you build on, or the rot you inherit without knowing it. For 3 years, I thought I was building something solid with Damon. Turns out I was standing on forged signatures and shell companies and money that moved in the dark. But now my foundation is solid. It's court orders and bank statements in my name only and a townhouse deed I signed myself. It's Marisol Pena bringing wine and honesty. It's Caleb North sending emails that say, "Matter resolved." It's Carmen Delaney waving from across the street and saying, "I look better." It's me, every morning, making coffee in a kitchen where the silence means peace, not secrets. The ground under my life is mine now. And it's solid. Finally, blessedly, irrevocably solid.